Climate science has a long and rich history spanning over 2 centuries and consisting of work by scientists of many disciplines. Scientists began to theorize as early as the 1800s that atmospheric gases could have an effect on climate. Svante Arrhenius, who is widely recognized as one of the founders of modern chemistry, theorized in a paper written in 1896 that changes in carbon dioxide concentrations could have an effect on the temperature of the planet. In 1956, physicist Gilbert Plas published a paper titled The Carbon Dioxide Theory of Climatic Change, which made remarkably accurate predictions about the concentrations and effects of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere into the 21st century. In 1988, an international consortium of scientists was founded called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, whose purpose is to study and understand climate change and publish semi-regular reports for governments and the public which detail their findings and recommend targets and technologies to reduce emissions. Based on the work of the IPCC, it is unequivocal that climate change is an existential threat to the well-being of humanity and the environment. Tipping points are imminent, and without immediate action, the effects may be irreversible. According to the latest IPCC reports, the world has not reduced emissions in a timely fashion. Emissions are instead continuing to increase. Some people are skeptical of the science and have formed a political coalition of resistance to any action on climate change. In order to help meet the emissions reductions targets needed to avoid catastrophic climate change, negative emissions technologies will be needed. Negative emissions technologies provide a non-governmental method to address climate change and allow innovation and entrepreneurship to become the drivers of solutions. According to the latest IPCC reports, precipitation has increased, ocean and surface temperatures have warmed, sea levels have risen, and continental ice sheets are melting. These are effects we're seeing right now, not at some distant point in the future. The report states with extreme confidence that human emissions of greenhouse gases are the cause of these effects we're currently seeing. Negative effects in the future are projected to be extreme weather and increasing sea levels, which will threaten coastal communities, droughts, which will threaten crop yields and access to drinking water, and shifting ecosystems, which threaten some species with extinction. Even if emissions were to completely stop today, effects will still continue for centuries. Some effects, such as melting glaciers and release of methane, will be irreversible and create feedback loops which worsen the effects of climate change. Other reports confirm the findings of the IPCC, including the 4th National Climate Assessment and the American Meteorological Society State of the Climate Report. We are currently in what is believed to be the 6th mass extinction event to happen on the planet. Due to how rapidly the climate is changing, it is impossible for many species to adapt. Some species will lose their habitat altogether. Global greenhouse gas emissions have increased in speed in recent decades, growing by 2.2% from 2000 to 2010, compared to 1.3% from 1970 to 2000. Half the emissions reduction scenarios laid out in the 2014 IPCC report said it was unlikely that we would be able to avoid 2 degrees C in warming. The longer we wait, the more unlikely it becomes. Despite recent decreases in U.S. carbon emissions over the last several years, emissions actually increased in 2018. China and various other major countries are rapidly increasing their emissions. Very few countries have actually met any climate agreement they have signed, and none of these agreements have been legally binding. The U.S. recently pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which was the most significant international climate agreement to date. In addition, there is significant skepticism of climate science in the U.S. and other countries, and as a result, resistance to implementation of any substantive climate change policies. Even within groups that agree that climate change is happening, and that is caused by human activity, there has been some disagreement on how rapidly the changes need to happen. Concern for the economic effects and whether certain low-carbon fossil fuels like methane and clean coal are able to provide a bridge to lower emissions future. There is significant financial interest to prevent any significant climate legislation from being passed on the part of fossil fuel companies. Negative emissions technologies, or NETs, are a set of ideas that have been developed over the last several years, as it has become apparent that we will very likely fail to meet our climate change targets through emissions reductions alone. They consist of a variety of different methods that take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sequester it in medium to long-term storage. They include direct air capture, bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration, enhanced weathering, biological sequestration, biochar, and others that may have yet to be thought of. Many of these methods can produce products that can be sold, such as concrete, fuels, carbon fibers, plastics, and fertilizers. 3 out of 4 of the IPCC scenarios in their most recent report includes bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration. This could be a method to circumvent political gridlock. It allows for entrepreneurship and innovation. Depending on the method employed, no government incentives would be necessary to make it profitable. Some advantages of NETs include the fact that this could enable us to offset emissions from hard to decarbonize sectors, such as industrial facilities, steel, and cement, as well as producing carbon neutral fuels for hard to electrify vehicles, like planes and trucks. This would also bring us in the direction of creating a truly circular economy, where everything is recycled and nothing goes to waste. There are some limitations as well. Many of these technologies are not well developed, requiring substantial research to come to fruition. Some are not economically viable at the current time. Some actually do require government incentives to be profitable, such as a carbon tax, although this could be remedied through private carbon trading markets as well. Some are questionable in terms of environmental trade-offs, as well as the potential for moral hazard by creating apathy with respect to emissions reductions. Due to these limitations, NETs should not be seen as universally beneficial or as an alternative to emissions reductions on their own, but should be taken on a case-by-case basis and viewed as a complement to emissions reductions, not an alternative. In conclusion, we must address climate change, not just for ourselves, but for the sake of future generations. We cannot allow skeptics and political gridlock to destroy the planet. NETs provide a method for us to meet our climate goals, while creating a whole new industry, turning a pollutant into profit. While there is a need to weigh the advantages against the limitations, NETs could be a crucial tool in our toolbox in the fight against climate change.